you for everyone who has joined. My name is Laura Capps, and I'm the president of the school board. And I'm just so thrilled to kick this off this morning. The school board, our most important job is to hire a superintendent, and we've done, I believe, a great job in the last several months, and actually just in the last several days, of bringing forward out of 50 people who wanted this job. We hired Ms. Hilda Maldonado, who just was voted in on Tuesday night. And the first thing we wanted to do is she wanted to talk with students. So that's what we're doing this morning. She currently has a huge job in Los Angeles and will be moving to Santa Barbara in the coming weeks. She is the associate superintendent at Los Angeles Unified, a small little district. Actually, it's the second biggest in the country. And she's been there for 32 years, starting out in the classroom as a bilingual teacher. She herself was a student like you all, or like the leaders that we have here, an English learner. She worked her way up, community college, and she's now actually working on her PhD, and we'll have that soon. So education is her passion. I'm just thrilled to introduce her to you, and welcome Ms. Maldonado, and thank you to our student leaders for agreeing to do this and having this very first open conversation with our incoming superintendent. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Capps, and I'm very honored to be here today with all of these amazing students, and of course, everyone who's joined us. Thank you.
Thank you, President Capps, and thank you, Ms. Maldonado. I'm sorry, did you want to say something, Ms. Barnwell? Or? Okay. And thank you to all of my student colleagues for being here on this lovely Friday morning. My name is Andy Wing. I'm the current and soon to be past president of San Marcos. So before we get started with the Q&A, how are you doing, Ms. Maldonado?
Thank you, Andy. I am doing great, and I'm happy to see that all of you are also healthy and safe. And I think that's a beautiful start. It's something that I'd like to have us all practice when we start conversations, is to just check in with each other and how we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, before we dive into our questions, and I understand that President Capps already highlighted some of it, but Ms. Maldonado, your background is, well, incredible for both myself and the audience. Could you give us your brief rundown of your professional background?
Sure. As Ms. Capps said, I am a student who did not have English as a first language. I came to this country when I was 11 years old. Our whole family moved here, and I graduated from Los Angeles Unified Schools, went to community college, as was stated, which is probably one of the best decisions I ever made, because it gave me a chance to really start off small. I was very afraid of going to college, especially to a big college, because as an immigrant student, I had no context and no references to help guide me through what a college experience would look like. I became a bilingual teacher in the early 90s when bilingual education was more prevalent in California. And I did that because of my own experiences as a student and knowing what it felt like to not always understand what the teachers were saying, but trying to make sense of it. I quickly realized that I am a leader and wanted to become a school principal. So I went back to school to get a master's degree to do that. And ever since then, I've just been asked to take on other leadership roles, ending up as the associate superintendent of the second largest school district in America, with 1,300 schools and about 600,000 students. And I pinch myself every day that I have the honor to do something like that, because I really started off with a vision to improve and make a difference for children. And as it turns out, the students that I led and that I taught or led schools with ended up changing my trajectory by learning about them. So that is why I do what I do, and that's been my life trajectory.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Ms. Maldonado. Now, I would like to ask the first question of the Q&A. As someone who has served 32 years in the LA school district, transitioning to SB Unified is going to be a very unique experience. What are your initial impressions of Santa Barbara so far?
Well, I've had a chance to be in Santa Barbara several years back for a conference that I or a set of conferences, I guess you could call, that I participated in with an organization called Courage to Lead. I think it's a beautiful place. I've been there for almost a year and a half, every 3 months for a retreat style. So it'll be a new experience. I know that Santa Barbara is a place that has art and music and culture, and you're starting to develop these bilingual programs. And I think those are amazing parts of a community. We have it in LA too, but it takes us 45 minutes to get to one of them. I am looking forward to being in a smaller place. When I was a young child in Mexico, I grew up in a dairy farm in a small town. So I've always had this dream of going back to a small town myself.
Thank you so much. Now, I would like to hand it off to Zoe, who will be asking the next question.
Hi, my name is Zoe. I'm a representative from Alta Vista Alternative High School. From going to one of the largest school districts in the country to Santa Barbara, which is significantly smaller, what challenges do you think will arise in that change?
I know for a fact the first challenge I'm going to face is missing my family and my friends. I'm leaving a whole group of people that have been so supportive of me and of my success. And so I think that's the biggest challenge. But I also think that anything that's worth doing is going to be a challenge. I've always enjoyed trying new things, challenging myself for new adventures. I know that as an associate superintendent, I have been several layers away from what a community looks like, what a school looks like, what children look like, and I really miss having that. I feel that being in Santa Barbara is going to give me an opportunity to go back to the reasons why I got into education and be in a place that will allow me a lot of proximity to what community needs are, what student experiences are like, what teachers need. And so I'm looking forward to that. But I also am looking forward to making new friends, connecting with new people that are doing the similar work like I am interested in, which is looking at ways that we can improve environments for students.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, Ms. Maldonado. Thank you, Zoe. Now, I would like to pass it on to Sarah.
Thank you, Andy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Jang, and I am the ASB president of Dos Pueblos High School. It is an honor and privilege to be here, so thank you. Ms. Maldonado, my first question is, we are in the middle of a pandemic and all of our schools are closed. How do you plan on creating a smooth transition during one of the most challenging times in the history of our district? And what ideas do you have about how and when we can reopen schools?
That is a great question, Sarah. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And I wish I could have a crystal ball and have the perfect answer to this question. But here's what I think about what school, first of all, school's never going to look the same again. I think when we tell ourselves we're going to go back to normal, it will not exist as we know it. I do think that I do know for a fact you have a lot of amazing leaders currently in your district that are doing their best thinking and gathering ideas from other districts to figure out what is the best way to open up schools. But I will say that for me, it's going to have to be about safety being the number one priority, the number one factor that we will consider when we open our schools. And I want to be sure that we think about testing, what kind of testing will be available, what kind of tracing and tracking is going to be able to be done, if that is at all a possibility, and what kind of treatments. I believe that we need to really lean in on our health experts and our scientists, who I know are collaborating across the world to figure out how to beat this virus. I think that if we don't put that as our first priority, the safety of our children, the safety of our employees, the safety of our families and communities, we'll miss the mark. And so I'll be looking for a plan from our current leadership. And I will also be looking for us to collaborate, not just in Santa Barbara, but across other school districts, across other states, to learn from how they're doing it and figuring out what is the safest way while also maintaining learning. And I've been looking at other school districts' ideas. I know that we're going to ask employees and others what ideas they bring to how to do this safely. There are plans being talked about with part-time in school, part-time learning at home. And that is how education will be different. We will be relying a lot more on technology and devices and internet access so that children can learn and have access to information in a way that me and others my age never even thought would be possible. So I want everyone to keep in mind that those three things: testing, tracing, tracking, treatments, being able to know how we're going to manage that is going to be super important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I would like to pass it on now to Miller.
Good morning, Ms. Maldonado. It's a pleasure to be here and meet you via Zoom. My name is Miller Bricken. I am Santa Barbara High School's ASB president. And my question for you is, I just want to know, why do you want to be our superintendent? It seems like a very big and stressful job, and it scares me. So I would like
It scares me too, Miller. No, it doesn't. You know, I have had a long career in education, and as I stated, I started off as a bilingual teacher. My first experience as a teacher was with an amazing principal, and I was given materials to teach that did not represent the students that I taught. It was a bilingual program, but the materials were in Spanish that is considered Castilian Spanish, which is very formal, very academic, and I couldn't even pronounce some of the words, and I'm a native Spanish speaker. So I went to my principal and I said, you know, these materials don't really match our community, don't really make sense to me as a Spanish speaker, and our students are not understanding me. Is there something we can do about this? And she said, yeah, of course, you know, I'm not a Spanish speaker. What do you need? Figure out what materials you need. This is a long time ago, before we had Common Core assessments and adopted curriculum. And so I started to look for ideas and books and materials that really would get to the same lessons I wanted to teach, but in a way that children understood it. And this principal is still in my life. She's still my mentor. And she taught me a very important lesson. And the lesson I learned from her was that you need to think about the environmental and systemic decisions that we make from the lens of a student, and how it impacts that student, and how students can then relate to learning. And she empowered me as a teacher to be a critical thinker, and I want to do the same for others. I do think it is a stressful job, but I also think that as a leader, if I surround myself with a team of people, it won't be as stressful, because it's not me by myself, it's me with a team. I'll be working closely with the board members. I'll be wanting to hear from students what they need. I'll want to hear from community members and from teachers and others. And I think if we collaborate together, the stress gets diminished. So I have had to learn that, though, Miller. I didn't start off that way. I started off as a lone wolf trying to lead, and it doesn't work well. And so I've had many lessons like that in my life that have taught me what leadership is about. And leadership is about service. Leadership is about listening, and leadership is about learning. And I think if I continue to do work in that manner, I can come up with ways to address either system issues or other ways that we make decisions sometimes that we don't always realize how it impacts either the teacher or the student, who is really the main customer of education, if I can say it in that way. So I'm not worried about the stress or the challenge, because I know that I'm not alone. But I do recognize there will be stressful times, and I'll probably be heading up to the hills on a hike or something to make sure that I take care of myself. And I've already told all my friends, if I call you crying, make sure you guys listen to me and then calm me down. So I've surrounded myself also with a network of people that will be supporting me, including my family. So that is why I'm doing it.
Well, that's great, and I couldn't agree with what you said more.
Thank you, Miller.
Thank you. Now I have a question. In the world of a national pandemic, schools have shut down and maybe shut down for quite a while. You mentioned earlier that schools will never look the same again. Could you perhaps elaborate on that? And what are the biggest things that you think will change post-pandemic? And will it be for better or worse?
Oh, that's a great question. My hope is always that it's for the better. My hope is never that it's for the worse, number one. And I appreciate that framing. One of the things that we have learned in Los Angeles Unified, we have almost 80% of our students living in poverty. And poverty is something that really impacts our circumstances. And I'm going to basically talk about this from a story that I recently read called The Miner's Canary. And if you guys are familiar with this idea of a miner's canary, is miners use a canary to go into a mine and use it to measure the oxygen and the environment of a mine to figure out first if it's safe for them to go in. And depending on how the canary does, then they can determine whether or not this is a safe environment, oxygen-wise, pressure-wise, and so on. And I think that sometimes in education, we forget the environments that our kids are in. What is happening in the environment? And sometimes we blame the students. In other words, if a miner sent in a canary and it comes back unhealthy or maybe not even alive, would the miner blame the canary? Or would the miner say, oh, those conditions really are not good. Let's do something about that before we go in. And I think in education, and when we think about schools and communities and environments that our kids, especially kids who are struggling, and it's not always poverty, it could be other issues that are happening in families or communities, whether it's violence, domestic violence, addiction, mental health, other factors that impact our students. If we don't take into account and look at that as a factor for learning, then we're forgetting and we're pathologizing the student rather than the conditions that they're coming from. I think we make a lot of assumptions about people's conditions or environments based on just how they look, and we don't always take the time to learn more about what they're going through. So the reason I say that is because we have found that we have communities, for example, in Los Angeles, where internet access, even if we gave it for free, wouldn't be available because there are rules about having a pole installed for internet access to exist. We have learned that, students may be living in crowded conditions, so we may give them a hotspot, we may give them a device, but it's so loud they can't concentrate. So we bought headphones so that kids can have noise canceling headphones to help them concentrate, especially as they're coming up for finals or AP exams. So that is why I think education cannot be the same. In this pandemic, we have learned that we have to teach differently. Our teachers have to learn about ways to access and engage students through a device, just like I'm doing with you here today. You can't see me, you can't see me in 3D, you don't know how tall I am, you don't know what I really look like, except for this part of my body. And, so how will that look next year when you all, well, not you, but maybe Zoe, when you get to meet a new teacher and you could only see her through a camera for the first 2 months, maybe. That is a completely different relationship that will need to be established. And what that'll do for different students when it comes to learning will be different. It's something I will never have thought I would experience in my life. And we have to think about then how that engagement, how that motivation looks for students to stay in school and continue to learn. In a classroom with 4 walls and windows and doors, a teacher has more control and can see what is happening with the student. In an environment like this, it's not the same. And it's going to take a lot of learning for our teachers to be able to do that. And so those environments are now front and center, and they're different. And so we have to think about that and how that impacts the child. So all of us are learning together. It's all new for us. going back to books, the way that we've traditionally done it, is going to be only a part of our learning now. I hope I've answered your question. I feel like I went full circle.
You answered it and so much more. Thank you for your response. And that was a really powerful analogy. Thank you. Now I would like to pass it back to Zoe. You're muted, Zoe.
Sorry. Here from Alta Vista Alternative High School. Ms. Maldonado, you spoke about exploring our hiking trails here in Santa Barbara. Teen mental health is a critical issue in our community. What advice do you have for students to feel and stay connected and healthy during these sometimes isolating times?
That is a really great question, Zoe. I am very familiar with mental health issues. I have a brother in my, well, let me put it to you this way. When I was in my 20s, I discovered that my younger brother was having mental health issues. And because we were so close in age, I was able to go to my mom and my sister to get him some help. At the time, we did not understand it, and we had a difficult time talking about it in our family because in our culture, it didn't seem like it was appropriate or something we should talk about. And that was hard on me and him because mental health is not like having a broken arm where you can see the break and you can heal it. Mental health is something that is sometimes invisible, and people that suffer with mental health sometimes feel like they have to put up a front like they're happy. And so one of the things I learned is that you need to ask for help. And actually asking for help is it's powerful and it's a strength. But when you're in it, you don't always see it. And I think it's important, and that's why I was so happy to see Andy ask, how are you? It's a simple 3-word question, but it's so important for us to really listen for the answer and to allow each other as friends, as colleagues in our communities to be open, to listen to those answers to those questions. But it's something that I would like for us to all think about. Sometimes you can spot somebody having mental health issues because they start to withdraw, they start to not be available, and it's because they're going through a difficult time. But I would like for us to all really take time to ask each other those questions, to be courageous to ask for help, and to sort of tell each other a different story about mental health. Mental health is not something to be ashamed about. Mental health happens to all of us. It happens to rich people, it happens to poor people, it happens to people that are Latino like me, it happens to people that are Caucasian, it happens to Native Americans, it happens to Asians, it happens to everybody. It's not something that we should hide from or feel fear about. If you had a broken arm, you would ask for help. So if you feel that you're sad or isolated or not wanting to do things, you should ask for help. And then, of course, if you are close to your friends and you notice a behavior, you should open the door of opportunity and say, I'm here for you, and I can help you, I can listen to you. And I think it's something that we're gonna all tackle together. And I'm hoping that we can change that narrative for all of us.
That was really powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I would like to pass it to Elena.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. My name is Elena Avila. I'm a student representative of La Costa High School. You mentioned some of your hobbies. What else do you like to do in your personal free time for fun or for self-care?
Well, I like to read. I actually love to read. And I like family biographies. I just love to hear the journey of families. I think because I'm an immigrant and I came not as a choice because I was a child, I'm always fascinated to read about people's, I guess, in a way adventures, but family journeys. Mm-hmm. And learning about what traditions and cultural things that people do that they bring to a new country is also something that I'm fascinated with. I like to watch movies. And I also sometimes like to reread my favorite childhood stories. I think there's something that I get about, I love kids' books.
It brings you back, yeah.
Yeah, right? There's a book called Heidi. I know it's kind of close to Hilda, and that's not why I like it, but it's about an orphan young woman and living in the Swiss Alps. And it was the first book that made me cry. And sometimes I just like to read it again because there's something about the emotions and the feelings that you get from a book that are sometimes powerful because they might connect to where you are in a moment in time in your own life, but they sometimes also inspire us.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now I would like to pass it to Sarah.
Thanks, Andy. Ms. Maldonado, you mentioned the miner's canary story, and it definitely relates to the achievement gap issue in our nation. This gap is very prevalent in our district. How do you plan on creating a future for our schools where a child's race and class are not predictors of their outcomes?
I love that question. And I don't have a formula, but I do have a process for us to think about talking about those issues. Obviously, people can look at me and say, well, she beat the odds, therefore everybody else could do it. And if it were only as simple, it has been a struggle. It's not easy to, for example, I am sure that I did terrible in all of my English tests when I was in 5th and 6th and 7th grade because I didn't speak the language, but I was given tests in English. And so I can guarantee if you go back to my school records, they'll say, wow, she doesn't know anything. And so I think as we look at assessments and our results, and I know Ms. Capps has talked about this, I read it in the newspaper, that if you look at your assessment results in Santa Barbara, you'll notice that the results that are lower are many times for our children of color like myself. And I think it's important for us to look at what is being measured, but also what is happening in our classrooms. If we have the same teachers and the same kids in the same classroom, why might there be different results? And I think we need to ask ourselves very difficult questions about that. I also know that there's been a lot of laws passed in our country to mitigate some of those differences. For example, in the 1970s, a Chinese family, the Lau family in San Francisco, filed a lawsuit that went all the way to federal court, where they said, my children have the same books, the same teachers, the same classrooms, but they don't speak English and they're not advancing. And the Supreme Court came back and said that it wasn't an equal education if you're not teaching kids in the language they understand. And that brought up a whole set of changes to our curriculum, to our assessments, to our instructional techniques. And I think we'll need to look at what techniques are being used and just helping our teachers understand. I know if I had a student that came into my class that didn't speak English or Spanish, but maybe Vietnamese or Chinese, I would have to think really hard about how I can communicate that with that child because I don't speak Vietnamese or Chinese. And so I would want to be really intentional in my language use. I would really want to be intentional in how I reach that child's learning style. And let's walk away from language for a bit. What is the preferred style of learning for a student? Are they visual learners? Are they auditory learners? For example, as a learner, I can hear things and remember them very easily. But if I need to process a complex piece of information, I need to see it visually, or I'll draw myself a picture so that I can remember that lesson. And so as teachers, we need to think about, do we know our students' preferred styles of learning? And do we use different techniques of teaching so that in one lesson, we can do auditory, visual, processing ideas so that, and there are others, I'm only naming two. Some kids like music, art as a way to process information. And I think it's important for us to look at all of those factors. And it goes back, like you said, I'm so glad you picked up that lesson, Sarah, to the environment, to the miner's canary story. What does the environment provide for the student to learn?
Thank you for your thoughtful response, Ms. Maldonado.
Thank you. I would like to pass it to Alana.
Hi, my question is, you have an amazing personal story in achieving all you have in your lifetime. It seems like you have beat the odds. What is your secret to success, and what will it take to create more stories like yours in Santa Barbara Unified?
The secret to my success. I think the secret to my success is I was raised by a very loving, encouraging mother who never let me give up. And I was always told that I could do more than I sometimes believed in myself. But actually, there's a recipe to the secret of success that I learned recently from an astronaut that is retired. His name is Jose Hernandez, and he was a NASA astronaut. And he shares the story of applying to NASA, I want to say something like 11 times. I could be wrong on that number. Let's say between 11 and 15 times. And he tells the story that his father taught him this idea that you just have to keep trying. Yes, we're going to have setbacks. I've had many setbacks in my life. I've had many jobs that I wanted that I didn't get. I've been asked to leave some jobs where I wasn't a fit, maybe. But I never gave up. And in the story that Jose Hernandez tells, you have to Google him and look up his story. He talks about applying to NASA and not getting selected to get in. And then he looked at, well, what are the people that got in? What do they have that I don't have? So for example, he noticed that they were scuba divers. And he said, well, I'm going to learn how to scuba dive. So he went and learned how to scuba dive and he applied again. And then the next year he didn't get picked and he saw that they were pilots. And then, again, he went and learned how to become a pilot. Then he was asked to go to Russia for his job, and they said, we need somebody that's going to speak Russian. And he said, okay, I'll speak Russian. So he volunteered. He was given an opportunity and he took it. So then he kept doing this every time until he was selected to be a part of the NASA program. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, he was raised by a farm worker, and he worked in the farms as a child. He got to NASA, and I'm chopping up the story so you guys will look it up and say, gosh, she really missed the mark, but that's okay. The point of the story is he got to NASA, he got to go into space, and the first thing he got to do when he got to the space center or the space center was to meet with the Russian astronauts. And when they met, he had vegetables that he handed to them, and he was the only Russian-speaking person on the American side. And I just absolutely love his story because it taught me that he never gave up. Sometimes you learn things that you think you won't need, only to find out way later that that was a very useful skill to have. And who would have thought that someone who grew up as a farm worker's son was going to take fresh vegetables to the Russians in space and be speaking Russian? So I've completely chopped up his story, and if he ever watches this video, he's probably going to kill me for chopping it up, but I encourage you to look up his story. He gives a beautiful stories of success, and I wish I could articulate my own in the same way, but it's a similar story. It's a similar path of never giving up, yes, having setbacks, but always challenging yourself to try again. You can be upset for one day when you lose something, but the next day you get up and you try it again. And also when you get something great, you can celebrate for a whole day and then you keep working. And that's been the way I think I've approached all of my life journeys, whether they're successes or challenges.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
That is some great advice, Ms. Maldonado. Now I would like to give Miller the floor.
Hello again. So as an ASB president and person who has always tried to inspire school spirit, what ideas do you have for making sure student voices are more included in our school district?
I love school spirit. I had the best high school experience in Los Angeles. I think if you're a high school student, you definitely want to be involved. You have to join clubs. You have to participate. I think I ran for 12th grade representative or 9th grade representative, and I was so proud of myself for winning that election. But I find that sometimes our kids don't always feel like they can belong or participate. And I think if we encouraged each other to do that more, you know, you would get a better sense of the connections that our high schools bring. I do believe that, you know, as adults and leaders, I am very aware that I have no idea what your experience is like and what you like, whether it's online gaming or the books or the videos or the movies that you're watching or the music that you're listening to. And so I would want to be able to have a cabinet of student advisors as a superintendent that I got to meet with, so that I could hear from ASB presidents like yourselves to let me know what is it that's happening in schools that we can make better for you. I think that the student voice has to be central. When I was in elementary school principals, I would ask my teachers to ask kids what cartoons they like. There's a lot of lessons in cartoons, believe it or not, that we can use to connect to the lessons that we can teach in school. And I think it just makes for a better understanding and better relating to our young people. One thing you'll know about me as you get to know me or hear about the work that I do is that I am not afraid to say what I don't know, but I'm not afraid to ask either. And so I think it's important for us to ask you, the students, to tell us what will make your experience more powerful in schools.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. Now, before we close off our Q&A, is there any last things you would like to share, Ms. Maldonado?
I just think I want to share with all of you as you go into your journeys of, that was my husband sneezing, by the way, as you go into your new journeys in college or careers or in life, wherever those journeys take you, try to take time to be in the moment. Think about ways that the lessons that you learn, whether they're painful or not, will always help you grow into the amazing adults that I know all of you will be. And also, don't forget to be grateful to your parents and your teachers, who are all doing the best that they can to ensure that you have, in my opinion, a better life than those of us that are coming before you. You're also a generation of people that are experiencing life in a way that none of us will ever be able to understand. And the way that you teach your lessons to your children or other young people that you get to impact is important, because remember, we're always generations between other generations that have come before that and that will come in the future. And so we don't want to lose that connection. I'm also very much looking forward to becoming part of the Santa Barbara community. And as I get there, any tips, any ideas, any things that you want me to hear, good, bad, or ugly, I'm here to listen and learn.
Thank you so much. Now, that concludes our Q&A with Ms. Maldonado. This has been truly a great experience, and thank you all for being here. If you are in the audience and you weren't able to make it to the full live Q&A, please remember that the Zoom has been recorded and it will be shared out to the community in both English and Spanish.
Congrats to the students. Great job. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And those to graduates, congratulations.
Yes, congratulations to all of you.
2020.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations, guys.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Great job.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.